Now, let's go ahead and deal with this H1 element. So, first, the drop shadow. Drop shadow is cool. The drop shadow has a purpose. But in this particular case, for me, visually, the type becomes cluttered, becomes difficult to read. So just because you can do something graphically doesn't mean you should. You need to keep in mind that what you're trying to do is create a clean visual communication for your user, for the person viewing your content. And then the underline. Okay, so the underline doesn't really work. And why it doesn't really work is in this environment, an underline often means that the type or the element is a hyperlink. And that would encourage the user to click on this type. And that would be very confusing as far as a user experience approach. So let's go ahead and address this H1. So we're going to go back to our code, and in H1, let's first go down to text decoration. Now again, we can just delete these, but I'm going to just comment them out. And that way you can, you'll always be able to go back and reference the original and see exactly what we've changed very quickly. So let's comment out our text decoration. And I'm also going to comment out the shadow, like so. And we're going to save, and then let's update. Now, for me personally, this presents much more clearly. It's bold. There's contrast. All right. With the drop shadow, it just became a little muddled, a little cluttered. And then again, the underline, it just added another level of visual, which wasn't necessary. And it also could confuse the user because, again, the user experience is text that is underlined is a hyperlink. And this headline is not meant to be a hyperlink. Now, the next. In my image up here, this is okay. And this drop shadow is actually fine. But I would prefer having the drop shadow on the other side. And I want a little more contrast, so I think I'm going to pick up on the oranges inside this visual. So let's go take a look at our image. Okay, so we have header image, which is before the H1. And let's take a look at our box shadow. And this first unit is the X. So this is the horizontal. So let's try a negative number. And we'll go ahead and save. And let's just see what happens when we update here. All right, so our shadow moves to the other side. Now, I may want a bit more shadow, and I certainly want to change the color. So I'm just going to go to my color picker and choose, I kind of like sort of a burnt orange. Burnt orangish red. So let's go something like so here, and I'll copy, and let's go back to our code, and I was using RGBA, so let's go back and we'll get the RGB triplets for red, green, and blue values, and we'll copy, and let's replace our red, green, and blue values like so. And I'm going to just increase the X and the Y to 8. And we're going to go ahead and adjust that blur to 8 pixels also. And we will save. And let's take a look. Okay. Now, there's a bit more visual contrast here. And for me, that just visually works better. And then there's the direction that the image is facing, the movement in this image. And for me, it just makes more sense to have the drop shadow on this side as opposed to this side. Okay, for me, it's just visually more interesting, visually more balanced. Now, this isn't quite dark enough, so I could probably, not I could, I will, go back and I'll adjust this to only be 0.8 on the opacity. So it should be a little darker. All right, there we go. Okay, I think this is a good stopping point. I'm going to try to keep these videos down to a specific task and then just move to the next concept.